The very first scene of the movie introduces us to our protagonists, Troy, Evan, Colt, and Aaron, who are traversing a maze of trails in a mysterious forest, driven by curiosity deeper into the heart of the woods. Their wanderings bring them to a sinister clearing with a forgotten graveyard of souls cloaked in darkness. Gleaming upon a rod is the softened light reflected from a golden locket, an ornament misplaced in such desolation. To Colt, it is an omen. To Troy, it is scoffing, wondering about what would such treasure serve in the place. Colt's voice trembles as he confesses the creeping dread that is coiling around his heart, for they are standing right in a graveyard. His eyes dart nervously while he wonders aloud if any of his friends have heard of the White Pine slaughter, a legend soaked in blood. They guffaw, washing away his fears with casual laughter that is as thick as the shadows around them. Before departing, Troy's hand reaches out, almost absent-mindedly, to take the old locket. Suddenly the earth starts shaking as the ancient rod comes to life, swaying violently from side to side before crashing down to the ground. The quiet is shattered by unsettled bubbling and rustling. With a colossal figure forcing its way up from the churning soil, Johnny emerges from the depths, the giant of a man, his garments in tatters, his body lacerated with 1,000 cuts. Chains cling upon him like ghosts of past torments. His hands drip blood. His eyes are sunken with the vengeance that even demise could not satiate. He stands there in all his towering and terrifying greatness, and then starts on a relentless journey through the forest, each heavy footfall sounding an ominous knell of the horror that has been awakened. This progresses into a harrowing journey where the line that demarcates the living from the lifeless, the safe from the perilous, begins to blur. As Johnny strays across the forest, he catches sight of pink ribbons on the trees, marking the path of recent intruders who broke his long-sought peace. A far-off horn beeps, giving him a lead into a house where a loud argument is underway. Chuck is embroiled in a furious row with the Ranger over the dangerous animal traps that he has set in the park. Ranger, an authoritative figure, persuades Chuck to remove the traps out of fear for the safety of the college kids who keep visiting the area, warning him sternly about the dire consequences. The battle of nerves is intense. In a fit of angry defiance, Chuck does fume at the Ranger's face, threatening and daring him to dispute his authority, reminding him that if the Ranger sets foot on his property again, his rifles will send him a final, mocking farewell. The air still crackles with tension when Johnny, the silent witness to the clash, comes to the cottage. Meanwhile, Chuck is seen roaming around the area with his rifle. Inside, the voice of the radio, in cracked tones, fills up the atmosphere that leads Johnny through the dimly lit rooms. There, right in the middle of Chuck's living room, gleams a glint from the golden necklace, a relic from the deepest part of Johnny's past. Memories rush forth with the promise of his father, echoing through the voids of time, that his mother's necklace will always be there for him. That nostalgic moment is suddenly shuttered with a sharp click from the rifle. Enraged and blind to the truth, Chuck fires a warning shot and mistakes Johnny for the Ranger. His fury turns to fear as Johnny steps into the light. Hereafter, in chaos, we depict Chuck fleeing through the forest with Johnny in relentless pursuit, staying hot on heels. What once was havened forest land now maze-like turns into fear. Desperate cries from Chuck, imploring and begging for mercy, are consummated by darkness. Fate does eventually turn the tables on him. One of his traps catches his leg. As Johnny draws closer, Chuck's demise draws closer and closer, and as much as it is sudden, it is vividly gruesome. Soon, Johnny is once again in the cottage for his necklace, leaving behind crimson hands, red with the vengeance that marks them. He ambles through the forest, where we catch sight of Chuck's dismembered body, a gruesome scene indeed. This tragic scene from the past will unfortunately repeat itself. In the following scene, during the evening, Johnny ambles through the woods, with the growling of the engine and screams of the revelers at a great distance, jarring on his nerves. Suddenly, headlights from a car cut through the darkness. He then follows the noise, at every step, resolute and unwavering. He turns up in a clearing where a bonfire is raging, its light flicking across the faces of a group of friends. Colt, Troy, Evan, and Aaron, in company with their girlfriends Chris, Brody, and Aurora, are having a good time, laughing, sharing stories, and mocking each other. Little do they know that it will be their last night together. From behind the trees, Johnny overhears Troy recounting a chilling story about a slaughter, one that Colt had mentioned earlier. With their interest piqued, Aaron's friends nudge him to share the tale that his uncle told him about the area years ago. Aaron manipulates his voice low and mournful, in a tale of a slow-witted boy named Johnny, who impressed insupportable derision. 70 years ago, the logging company extracted a lease on the land, and the father of Johnny operated the camp stores and made himself loathed by the loggers with his high prices. Their wrath on Johnny culminated in one such tragic accident, where one drunk logger tripped over one of Johnny's toys and broke his ankle. Revenge-seeking loggers lured Johnny to an abandoned fire tower with promises of toys. So naive and so exuberant, little Johnny climbed up into the tower, where a man wearing a firefighter's mask suddenly appeared in front of him. Scared, Johnny fell from the tower, breaking his neck. The loggers, in a panic, placed the mask on Johnny to make it appear like an accident. Enraged, when Johnny's father discovered the body of his son, he confronted the loggers, and a fight ensued. It ended up with his demise, under the pretext of self-defense. The company swept it under the rug, but shortly after, a couple of the executors from the company showed up to the camp, where they were found lifeless, torn apart. The official story was poisoning and animal attacks, yet the whisper of a man in a mask throughout the woods never stopped. As Iran finishes the tale, a profound silence falls over the group, shattered only by a sudden applause. Aurora laughs mockingly at the story, saying that she was scared out of her wits the whole time, much like Chris, who chortles tensely and admits that her nails were bit to shreds. An atmosphere hangs heavy with the unspoken, an augury of the horrors that are to unfold in the coming night. They soon decide to retire into the cottage, longing for a quiet night amidst the whispering woods and the gentle lullaby of nature. Just before departing, they take one final photograph together, a frozen moment of friendship. Shortly after, they step inside the cottage, seeking rest and comfort. However, we catch sight of Aurora fuming at Troy, blaming him for Aaron's behavior, pointing out how she had to invite his stupid friends around, and insisting that he squelch their rudeness. Off in the dark, Johnny gazes with sinister, fanatical-eyed intent from behind the branches. Johnny soon resumes his wordless patrol of the cottage, finally ending up by the porch, where Brody is seen immersed in her cigarette. Suddenly, Aaron joins her, expressing his desire to briefly escape to enjoy the peaceful night in the woods. His friends satirize him, believing that he is off to meet the girls from the gas station, where they had stopped earlier. Ignoring their banter, Aaron wanders into the forest, leaning against a tree, lost in his thoughts, while listening to the music, oblivious to the fatal doom that is upon him. Johnny, driven by a dark resolve, approaches him. Hold your breath for the impeding violence. Johnny leaps on Aaron with a hacksaw gripped between his teeth. He pins Aaron up against the tree and with one swift and brutal slash, decapitates him before he can even fight back. Johnny subsequently drags the lifeless body of Aaron through the dense forest to the ranger station, smashes the glass, forces the door open, and tosses the body inside. He wanders further in the station, coming across a family photo of the ranger, which resets his resolve into an even darker tone. Suddenly, when he spots a firefighting mask seated in a glass case, Johnny smashes it with Aaron's body, grabs the mask, and puts it on. As he walks out, still holding the hacksaw, the mask turns into his new identity, a really chilling symbol of vengeance. The next morning, we depict Johnny walking through the whispering trees, with their rustling leaves sharing the day's secrets. From afar, the serene lake mirrors the beckoning laughter of Brody and Aurora. Free and fearless, Brody discards her clothes and dives into the waters, her spirit unknowing of lurking shadows. Aurora, half hesitating, beholds her friend with a mixture of wonder and caution, her heart tied to the shore. With a dark resolution, Johnny wades into the lake. The water swallows him up as he moves with purpose towards Brody. Aurora, seeking solitude for her yoga activities, departs, asking her friend to join her in following her aquatic dance. What were giggles from Brody turned to silent screams as Johnny's grip pulls her under, her life extinguished in the cold embrace of the lake. Shortly after, her lifeless body floats, a stark contrast to the serene surface. Emerging from the water, Johnny's eyes gleam with malignant intent as he pursues Aurora. Aurora, lost in the tranquility of her yoga practice, is totally oblivious to the danger creeping closer. Suddenly, the sound of a twig snapping under Johnny's foot breaks the stillness, drawing her attention. She turns, expecting to see her friend, but her eyes widen in horror as they alight on the menacing figure of Johnny. Panic rushes through her veins as she struggles to run away. She is helplessly crushed between the face of a cliff and the relentless predator chasing her. Paralyzed by indecision, she succumbs to her fate. With a quick, brutal movement, Johnny digs his bloody sickle into her back. The blade cuts through flesh and bone. Aurora gasps, blood trickling from her mouth, as she struggles to wrap her mind around what is happening to her. She turns to face him, facing demise. With one last, insensitive shove, he sends her tumbling off down the cliff, her body disappearing into the abyss below. Johnny fetches his axe, and the heft and familiarity of his weapon are almost soothing comforts. He embarks on a new mission. The scene cuts to the sight of Johnny prowling around the woods, silently and predatorily, until suddenly, voices from afar catch his attention. As he approaches, he eavesdrops on the conversation between Colt and Troy, whose voices stand out, starkly against the eerie silence. Colt voices his concerns over the disappearance of their three friends, Aaron, Aurora, and Brody. However, Troy waves his hand, dismissing his worries, believing that Aaron is at the gas station flirting with the girls, and Aurora is probably immersed in practicing yoga with Brody by her side. However, something about it doesn't sit right with Colt. He implores Troy to call the police, but the latter digs in his heels. When Colt implores for the car's keys, Troy tosses them away into the dirt, landing literally at Johnny's feet. Johnny, lowering his axe, reaches down for the keys and catches sight of a small toy car attached to them. He slips back into the shadows. The rough bark of a tree presses against his scarred skin, and removes his mask. It is in the pale light of the sun that he reveals his grotesquely scarred and bruised face, a face hardly recognizable as human and chilling evidence of what he has both endured and unleashed. He reflects back on his childhood, the time he was always surrounded by his favorite toys, emblems of happiness and innocence that he has long forgotten. Those joyful days were cruelly snatched from him into a world full of bitterness and loss. Now, with bloodied hands, he gently strokes the car toy, almost like a child lost in that fleeting moment of tenderness. Meanwhile, Colt is on high alert, warning his friend Troy to keep his eyes open. An unknown face shakes him from the photograph that Aurora took the night before. Troy washes his concerns off, believing that the lens was dirty. However, while Colt searches for the keys, he falls upon Johnny's axe, a chilling reminder of danger near. Johnny, on the other hand, is lost in his moment of joy over the toy car. The instant he feels Colt's proximity, the flimsy toy is crushed between his hands. Clad in his mask with a strong resolve, Johnny again embarks on his assassinating spree. Feeling the threat ramping up, Colt decides to drive down the road to the ranger station and call for help. On his way, he takes Chris with him, and they speed off in their Jeep as fast as possible, leaving Troy to stand guard. Unbeknownst to the danger that is about to befall, Troy drops Johnny's axe onto the chopping block and enters the house. Not long afterwards, Johnny reclaims his axe, his presence like a black shadow creeping over the scene. He places a branch on Troy's car horn, causing it to blare incessantly. Annoyed and confused, Troy initially suspects that Colt is playing a trick on him. But Johnny's trap is set. As Troy hurries off to remove the branch, Johnny strikes from behind his back. In a desperate struggle, Troy narrowly misses the first blow. Using the branch to deflect the strike from Johnny, he succeeds in pushing Johnny away with all his might. But in a quick turn of events, the tides are changed. Johnny starts out wrestling him to the ground, then delivers Troy an axe blow to his leg. Troy's screams of agony pierce the air, his cries echoing through the silent forest. Just when all hope seems to be lost, Evan suddenly appears, his arrival like a glimmer of salvation. He is able to briefly stun Johnny with a gunshot and bring the assassin to his knees. Evan rushes to Troy's side, and together they try to make an escape. But Johnny is relentless. Recovering swiftly, he sends his axe flying, striking Evan in the back of the head with fatal precision. Evan falls lifeless as Troy, now in complete despair, attempts to crawl away, shouting for help. However, demise, this time in the unyielding shape of Johnny, prevails over Troy once again. He crashes Troy's skull with a heavy stone and butchers him immediately. He frantically searches through Troy's pockets for his mother's necklace, but in vain. It is nowhere to be found. Suddenly, he hears Chris and Colt's return, their voices calling out for Troy and Evan, asking them to depart immediately from the region. Chris collapses to the ground, overcome by the grim reality that surrounds them. For the very first time, Johnny's eyes lock onto her. He catches sight of his mother's necklace around her neck, prompting his rage to ignite. With a furious roar, he hurls his axe at her, but Colt, ever watchful, shouts a warning just in time. Chris reacts quickly and dodges the fatal weapon. She, in desperation, makes a run for safety along with Colt. However, Johnny is unyielding. Still fueled with anger, he gives a hot pursuit, with his footsteps echoing as he follows them to the ranger's station. By the time Chris and Colt finally make it to the ranger, they are desperate. Their bodies shake out of fear. Though the ranger is skeptical at first, he becomes visibly alarmed when they tell him how they took a locket from an old fire tower. As they describe the locket, the ranger's face turns ashen. He warns them that it belongs to Johnny's mother, a necklace that was keeping his vengeful spirit at rest. Chris's voice trembles as she suggests returning the locket to Johnny, but the ranger shakes his head bleakly. It is too late. Johnny is awake now, and nothing can stand in his way of coming for them all. Suddenly, Chris spies Johnny advancing in the distance, his figure looming ominously against the fading light. Enraged and afraid, the ranger yells at Johnny, telling him he remembers everything he did a decade ago. In a voice of steel, he reminds Johnny that he was put down once before and declares that he can do it again. The ranger doesn't waste any time. He firmly raises his rifle and fires him, bringing Johnny to the ground. Chris, with a quivering voice, asks if Johnny is deceased, but the ranger quickly dismisses her thought, informing her that the gunshot will only slow him down. Urgently, he orders Colt to fetch chains from the shed, so they can bind Johnny and take him back to the old fire tower, the only place capable of holding him. It slowly dawns on Chris that Johnny is the man who slaughtered everyone at the camp, alongside their friends. The ranger reveals that there was one survivor from that bloodbath, his own father. He confesses that he never heeded his father's warnings until 10 years ago, when Johnny rose from the afterlife and butchered all whom the ranger loved dearly. Determined not to let history repeat itself, the ranger vows to keep Johnny buried for good this time. The ranger stands over Johnny's body with his rifle pointed, ordering Colt to hurry with the chains and lock his limbs. But Colt, paralyzed by fear, refuses to move an inch, thus leaving the ranger to take matters into his own hands. He will wrap Johnny's feet and hands, while Colt has to keep the rifle trained on Johnny. Just as he is about to relinquish the gun, Johnny suddenly springs back to life, snatching the rifle with terrifying quickness. A fierce struggle erupts, with the Ranger fighting to wrest the weapon back, while Chris and Colt, overcome by fear, decide to flee. They sprint to the Ranger's car in desperation, grab a can of gasoline and the chains, and leave the Ranger behind to face his fate. With savage strength, Johnny crushes the Ranger's hand, bones shattering under his grip. Then, in one final brutal movement, Johnny twists the Ranger's neck with a sickening snap, paralyzing him. In a cold gesture and surgical-like in its precision, Johnny drives his sickle into the Ranger before dragging him, chain clinking eerily in the darkness, into the stable. Johnny brutally dismembers the Ranger with a log splitter. This scene ends the Ranger's life in a very bloody and violent way. With the Ranger now out of the way, Johnny relentlessly resumes his hunt for Colt and Chris. The scene cuts to Johnny striding purposefully in sinister steps through the thick forest. All of a sudden, a voice rings out, taunting Johnny from afar and challenging him to come and get them. It is Colt's voice. Johnny walks towards the sound, while Colt and Chris slip behind his back and cover themselves among the trees. However, on Johnny's part, it turns out that his instincts are very sharp, as he feels their presence and catches their whispers. Chris, her voice quaking with fear, reminds Colt that Johnny is aware of their whereabouts, but Colt, ever composed, urges her to keep quiet. He reveals his plan. He will distract Johnny, he explains to his beloved, so she will have enough time to get to the fire tower and set a trap. Colt makes a solemn pledge. He will return for her, promising to keep her safe no matter what. However, fate is cruel. Neither knows that it will be the last promise they will ever share, an ill-fated love story unfolding in the heart of the wilderness. Shortly after, Colt steps out into the open, spewing a stream of venomous words at Johnny. However, the latter, cold-blooded and unfeeling, reacts with savage force upon him, slashing at Colt's head with his axe unceasingly. Even after Colt's lifeless body hits the ground, he keeps hacking away relentlessly until nothing recognizable remains anymore. All this unfolds before the horrified eyes of Chris. Silently, she sets the jerry can and the chains on the ground and hangs Johnny's mother's necklace carefully on the can's spout before slipping away unnoticed. Chris sprints through the night, lost and scared, her mind racing with horror and loss. Whispers and tenuous screams on the brink of her mind haunted her to the edge of madness. In her panicked flight, she trips over a tree limb, its sharp wood piercing her leg, sending her crashing to the ground. Chris forces herself, in spite of the searing pain, to pull the branch from her wound and stumble onwards through the dark forest, the path unclear, until finally making it to the main road in the following morning. Chris moves like a shadow. Her spirit has been broken by Colt's demise and the horrific scene she witnessed. A woman traveling on the road suddenly appears, giving Chris a lifeline. She takes notice of Chris's injury, hence she helps her into the truck and gently offers to drive her to the hospital. During the drive, Chris's mind wanders aimlessly, detached from the real world. As the woman keeps talking to comfort her, she recounts a story from her own past about how her brother, a game warden, was mauled by a bear in these same woods 3 decades prior and survived. She tries to give Chris some hope in her dire situation. Still in shock, Chris vaguely responds that she was attacked by a bear, but cannot bring herself to turn her mind to the appalling reality of Johnny's face or the horrors he perpetrated. The woman suddenly halts the truck in the middle of the road, much to Chris's dread. However, the woman is quick to put her at ease, assuring her that she has to stop the bleeding from Chris's leg. While the woman treats her wound, Chris's eyes stray to the edge of the woods. Memories come flooding back of happier times, joyful moments with her friends, and deep love from Colt. The chirping of the birds and the soft whispering of the forest provide her with momentary peace and a profound scar. Eventually, Johnny disappears into the darkness after recovering his mother's necklace. As you plunge into the movie in a violent nature, there are some major survival tips to keep in mind. First, never mess with anything that doesn't belong to you. Certainly not a cursed necklace. That is trouble in disguise. Secondly, always stick with your friends and avoid wandering off all alone into creepy, isolated spots. No one is winning awards for roaming around abandoned graveyards. And remember, in this world, danger is always lurking, creeping up from behind. Therefore, while you are keeping your eyes forward, remember to check your six. Safety in this movie is not about being smart. It is about being smart in all directions.